In the early years of the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire stood tall under the fierce and ambitious leadership of Sultan Bayezid I, famously known as Yıldırım, meaning the Thunderbolt, whose rise to power had been marked by swift military conquests, decisive rule, and an unshakable belief in the destiny of Ottoman greatness. Bayezid had expanded the empire's reach deep into the Balkans and Anatolia, consolidating power with such speed that even his adversaries could not help but acknowledge his strategic brilliance. Yet far to the east, another formidable figure was shaping his own legacy. Timur, a ruthless and brilliant conqueror who had carved a blood-stained path across Central Asia, Persia, and India, saw Bayezid not as a partner but as a rival, and the rising tension between them grew unbearable when Bayezid began to annex Anatolian beyliks that Timur viewed as part of his sphere of influence. The relationship rapidly deteriorated as both rulers exchanged venomous letters, each accusing the other of arrogance, disrespect, and overreach. Timur challenged Bayezid's legitimacy while Bayezid mocked Timur's lineage, and pretensions of grandeur. Diplomacy crumbled under the weight of pride, and a monumental clash became inevitable. The stage was set in Anatolia near the city of Ankara in the sweltering heat of July 1402, as two colossal armies faced each other in what would become one of the most decisive battles of medieval Islamic history. Bayezid's forces, composed of elite Janissaries, Balkan warriors, and recently subdued Anatolian troops, were confident and battle-hardened, yet Timur's army was vast, experienced, and well coordinated, made up of skilled cavalry archers and soldiers loyal from across his vast empire. Timur used his superior strategy and psychological warfare to turn the tide of the battle, employing classic Mongol tactics to stretch and isolate the Ottoman forces while exploiting internal divisions and unrest among Bayezid's ranks. Crucially, many of Bayezid's troops, especially those from the Anatolian beyliks, defected during the battle, abandoning the Ottomans and joining Timur, which shattered morale and broke the cohesion of the Sultan's army as chaos spread across the battlefield. Bayezid and his son attempted to retreat, but were surrounded and captured. The unthinkable had occurred. The Sultan of the Ottomans, a man feared across continents, was now a prisoner. The psychological and political shock of Bayezid's capture rippled through the Islamic world and Europe alike. This was not merely a military loss, it was a symbol of vulnerability in an empire that had seemed unstoppable. Timur, who was infamous for his cruelty but also admired for his clever manipulation of power, chose not to execute Bayezid immediately. Instead, he kept him alive for several months, treating him alternately with mock respect and degrading humiliation. While historical records differ in detail, many sources suggest that Bayezid was paraded in a cage or shackled and forced to endure the taunts of his captor. Others recount stories of Timur mocking Bayezid in public, even asking him how he planned to defend his lands when he could not protect himself, whatever the truth may be. Bayezid's pride was shattered and his condition worsened. In captivity, he reportedly attempted suicide on more than one occasion, and his health quickly declined. In March 1403, less than a year after his capture, Bayezid died in captivity, either due to illness or the despair of his humiliating downfall. But the true devastation of Bayezid's defeat was not merely personal, it tore through the very structure of the Ottoman Empire. With the Sultan gone and no formal system of succession in place, his sons, Suleiman, Isa Mehmed, and Musa, each laid claim to the throne, leading to a bitter civil war that fractured the empire into competing factions. This dark period, known as the Ottoman Interregnum or Fetret Devri, lasted for more than a decade and saw brother fight brother, provinces switch loyalties, and power slip from the once iron grip of the central government. The empire teetered on the edge of collapse, and its enemies watched eagerly, some hoping to carve pieces for themselves, others praying that Ottoman influence would vanish forever. It was a time of deep uncertainty and internal decay, and all of it traced back to the loss suffered on the battlefield of Ankara. Bayezid had risen like thunder and fallen like dust. His ambition had blinded him to the risks of expanding too fast, too far, and too arrogantly, and his refusal to acknowledge Timur's strength or to compromise diplomatically ultimately cost him everything. Yet even in this moment of darkness, the seeds of recovery were quietly taking root. His youngest son, Mehmed, who would eventually emerge victorious from the civil war and become Mehmed I, began to rebuild the Ottoman structure, uniting the fractured provinces, restoring order, and preparing the empire for a new era of conquest. But that resurgence would only come after years of bloodshed, betrayal, and political instability brought on by one battle and one man's prideful refusal to bend to the changing tides of history. The story of Bayezid's capture is not just a tale of war and loss, it is a profound lesson in the dangers of unchecked ambition, the consequences of ignoring diplomacy, and the fragility of even the greatest powers when tested by fate and by their own flaws. Bayezid's name would forever carry the weight of his triumphs, but also the burden of his fall, and for generations to come the Battle of Ankara would stand as a cautionary tale etched into the heart of Ottoman memory and Muslim history alike. After the devastating defeat at the Battle of Ankara in 1402 and the humiliating capture of Sultan Bayezid by Timur, the Ottoman Empire entered one of the darkest and most uncertain chapters of its history as the news of Bayezid's downfall spread. Shock and disbelief rippled through the empire and beyond for a ruler who had once been invincible, who had dared to challenge both Christian Europe and rival Muslim states alike. To fall into enemy hands was not only a military disaster, but a psychological and symbolic blow that shattered the illusion of Ottoman invincibility, and what followed was not merely a period of mourning or reflection, but a violent unraveling of the empire's political fabric. As Bayezid died in captivity in 1403, his four sons, Suleiman, Isa, Mehmed, and Musa, each declared themselves the rightful heir to the throne, plunging the empire into a brutal civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum or Fetre d'Ivry. This power struggle fractured the empire into multiple competing centers of control, with each prince establishing his own court, minting his own coins, issuing orders, and seeking support from regional governors, rival beyliks, and even foreign powers. The unity that had once made the Ottomans a formidable force was now gone, replaced by betrayal, shifting alliances, and chaos. Suleiman the eldest took control of the European provinces and established his rule in Edirne, while Isa ruled from Bursa. Mehmed based himself in Amasya, and Musa initially held less influence but would rise later during the internal conflict. The civil war was not merely a dynastic struggle, but a nationwide crisis that weakened institutions, drained resources, and emboldened the Ottomans' enemies both in the east and the west. The Byzantine Empire, which had been on the brink of collapse, used the opportunity to reassert some influence over Constantinople, while various Balkan principalities that had once submitted to Bayezid now declared independence or sought protection from other powers. Even the Venetians and Hungarians saw the weakening of the Ottomans as a rare window to reclaim lost territories and press their advantage. But in the midst of all this despair, one figure began to rise above the chaos and prove himself not only as a capable warrior but as a shrewd politician. Mehmed Chalebi, though not the eldest son, was methodical, patient, and unusually diplomatic. He focused less on immediate power grabs and more on building sustainable alliances, consolidating his support base, and maintaining internal order while his brothers tore the empire apart. Mehmed slowly gathered strength, defeating Isa in battle and neutralizing his threat. Mehmed then turned his attention to Suleiman, who had grown increasingly arrogant and careless with the throne in Edirne. Suleiman ruled like an independent monarch, alienating many with his decisions and giving Mehmed an opening to strike in a decisive move. Mehmed joined forces with Musa, who now entered the power struggle more aggressively. Together, they confronted Suleiman, and after a series of battles, Suleiman was killed in 1411, but the Piondians, together they confronted Suleiman, and after a series of battles, Suleiman was killed in 1411, but the alliance between Mehmed and Musa was short-lived as Musa turned against Mehmed and tried to claim full control, leading to yet another bloody confrontation. Mehmed, however, proved superior once again, and finally in 1413, after more than a decade of civil war and turmoil, Mehmed emerged as the undisputed ruler of the Ottoman Empire, taking the title of Mehmed I and bringing an end to the Interregnum. This moment was not just a personal triumph, but a critical turning point in Ottoman history, as Mehmed I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding the fractured empire, restoring administrative control, re-establishing the loyalty of regional governors, and stabilizing the economy, which had suffered immensely during the years of war and disunity. He did not embark on grand conquests, but instead focused on healing the wounds left by civil war, mending relationships, and reinforcing the central authority of the Sultanate. His reign was marked by pragmatism and a deep understanding that the empire needed stability more than glory. At that time, his greatest contribution perhaps was not expanding borders, but preventing collapse, yet the scars of Bayezid's defeat and the Interregnum would linger for years. The very foundations of the empire had been shaken. The military needed restructuring, the provincial lords had grown too powerful, and the sense of Ottoman unity had to be re-earned through action and trust. Mehmed I knew this, and although his reign was relatively short, ending in 1421, he left behind a stronger and more unified state for his son Murad II, who would go on to restore Ottoman military dominance and pave the way for future expansions, including the rise of Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. In many ways, Bayezid's fall set into motion a chain of events that would ultimately refine the Ottoman state, forcing it to confront its weaknesses, rethink its structure, and rise with even greater purpose and resilience. The loss taught the Ottomans that military strength alone was not enough, that internal unity, diplomacy, and strong succession planning were just as vital for the survival of an empire. Timur, on the other hand, returned to the east after the Battle of Ankara, content with having humbled a major rival and reasserted his dominance over the Islamic world, but he did not attempt to occupy or govern the Ottoman territories he had devastated. Instead, his empire would soon face its own decline after his death in 1405, and while his name would live on through fear and legend, it was the Ottomans who would rise from their ashes, rebuild, and ultimately outlast all of their rivals. Thus, the capture of Bayezid and the catastrophic defeat at Ankara, while devastating in the short term, became a profound historical turning point, one that tested the Ottomans in every possible way, and one that they survived not through brute force, but through patient strategy and the slow but determined leadership of a prince who understood the true meaning of power in the ashes of defeat. The empire found its will to survive again, and in doing so laid the groundwork for centuries of dominance to come.